It all started when the firms brought in that efficiency expert in order to help with the merger. One really couldn't blame them for it. Bringing together two companies which had been rivals for their entire existence was no easy feat, but with corporate mergers, there always came layoffs. Which is why Aaron was sitting in this boardroom now, opposite his counterpart from Croft Global. The two companies' boards were reviewing every senior employee, deciding who would stay, who would be given a buyout to retire, and who would be left with a recommendation letter and a need to search for a new job. If there was a word to describe Aaron, it was vanilla. Brown hair, brown eyes, a professional haircut. If you looked at him down the street, he'd be completely anonymous. He dressed conservatively, he thought conservatively, he had essentially been a model employee for Jean-Ad. Kay, his opposite number at Croft, looked uncomfortable in the polo he had squeezed himself into. Kay was younger, his hair was long and a scraggly beard was attempting to grow on his face. Typical millennial, although Aaron did have to admit that what he lacked in professionalism he made up in ability. Croft's software system had been coded from scratch by Kay and his team, and it was one of the most intuitive systems Aaron had ever seen, perfect for the needs of the new company being born from the combination of the two old ones. Still, Aaron was certain that he would win out. He had more seniority, more experience, and was well liked by his bosses. Kay was young, he'd have other opportunities for jobs like this. Aaron and Kay waited with bated breath as service reviews, peer evaluations, even witnesses were brought forward before the combined management of the two companies. The board hemmed and hawed as it became more and more clear that both men were equally qualified for their position. It came down to what quality the board valued more, professionalism or flexibility. The board exchanged glances as all that could be said was said. Finally, the chairman coughed. Aaron looked at him in hope as the man spoke in a voice of authority. "Gentlemen, as you know, this merger was in order both of our wonderful company's money, thus we are only going to keep on one of you. I am going to ask you to wait in the room next door, where Ms. Fulton will take care of you as we make our decision." Miss Fulton, a young red-haired woman dressed conservatively in a skirt and blouse, opened the door and gestured for both men to follow, escorting both men to another conference room. This one had two chairs opposite each other with a table in between. 2 cups of hot coffee and a tray of donuts sat at the center. Miss Fulton adjusted her glasses. "Please have a seat until called. The board would have their results shortly." Kay immediately slouched down on the chair, grabbing a donut. It almost reached his mouth before he piped up, almost as an afterthought, "No cream, right?" Aaron watched as Miss Fulton made a polite ha, and then shook her head before leaving the room. As his rival shrugged and stuffed a donut into his mouth, Aaron pulled up his chair and sat down before picking up his own. It was gonna be a long wait. The board watched the monitor as the two prospective candidates imbibed the food that had been left out for them. A couple smiled, a couple frowned, but all kept their eyes glued to the screen. Only the chairman paid it no mind, instead sharing a private word with Ms. Fulton. One of the older board members, one of Croft's men in charge, seemed to have reservations. "Are we absolutely certain about this? There is still time to stop it." Another, this one from Jean-Ad, shook his head. "We can't afford to keep both on. If we cut their pay, Mr. Allen will jump ship to some West Coast tech startup and we'll have a new competitor within 2 years, and if we retire Mr. Dorn he'll be scooped up by another company before he reaches the ground floor of this building, and then we have the same problem." He cracked his knuckles and sighed. "This is the best for the company, best for everyone." "It still seems pretty drastic," grumbled the first member. A hand lowered onto shoulder. It was the chairman. "It is necessary for our new company to thrive." Aaron kept looking at the clock as his companion spun himself around on his swivel chair while messing about on his phone. The board had been talking for a while now, and every minute made Aaron more nervous. Sweat dripped. Kay adjusted his collar as he put his phone away. His hands were getting too sweaty to hold onto anyway. Something was wrong here, the temperature in the room wasn't that hot. "I think I ate too many of those." While Aaron had thought Kay had been a bit of a pig earlier, that didn't explain himself. He was just as sweaty. "I'll turn the air up," Aaron said, but as he got up his hand brushed against Kay's. He felt a tug. "Let go," Aaron said over his shoulder. Kay shook his head. "Dude, you let go." Both of them looked at their hands. They were stuck together, and rapidly melting into each other. Both men panicked and attempted to pull apart, but to no avail. If anything, it made the situation worse, like a Chinese ring puzzle. Soon, both men were shoulder to shoulder, shouting for help that wasn't coming. They weren't just sharing feelings anymore. Emotions, memories, stances, etc. were flooding both of them. A first kiss in 8th grade, a summer at horse camp being disgusted by the smell, late nights of work. Soon, an amorphous, humanoid mass had taken the place of the two men. Champagne glasses clinked as the first phase of the work finished. The combination of Croft's spellware and Geniad's nanomachines had quickly and efficiently broke down the pair, and allowed a fusion impossible by either device to do, with the added bonus of allowing further changes to be made mid-spell. The chairman spoke with authority. "As previously established, we will be addressing diversity complaints by Mr. Johns. Considering we have no women in the STEM portion of business, we shall now correct that." Ms. Fulton nodded, and pressed the enter key on her laptop. The amalgamate of Aaron and Kay felt the electricity begin once again, and sighed in resignation. If this was to be their fate, then that would be so. And then their hand drifted to their crotch. Pleasure coursed through their body as they gyrated, their combined ego doing its first and final performance as they fell to the floor. It was unbelievable, and a smile could be seen through the slime even as the erotic pleasure spread from its source. Even as they lost height, the pair felt the mass rearrange in their body. Sensitive finger pads flowed over expanding breasts, even as the other hand continued its work down below with rapidly shrinking handle. They shivered in pleasure as the feeling flowed up their neck, feeling like 100 lovers had caressed them all at once. She rolled over on her back and bit her lips, which plumped up slightly. Her hair increased in length and volume, making her look fresh off of a shampoo commercial. The board watched from the monitor as their newest employee rose from the floor, the last of the Phase 2 changes doing their work anonymously and away from the skin nerve. Already, the nanomachines were rewiring their brainwork. It was a delicate process. Change the wrong thing and you'd end up with a fried egg, change too little and the subject would be driven crazy by contradictory memories. The point of the exercise was to keep the sparks of brilliance that both men had been prone to, while repackaging them in a form that would look good on the cover of a magazine. It was very successful in that regard. The chairman gave a knowing glance at one of the board members who had been especially taken. "Makes you curious, doesn't it? What it would feel like to be remade," he whispered conspiratorially. The man nervously shook his head. Then, the chairman called out to the group. "With Stage 2 complete, we now have a window for a Stage 3 addition. All in favor, say aye." The room was filled with ayes. The chairman nodded. "Very well." He looked to Ms. Fulton. "My dear Ms. Fulton, how about we go with African American? The company will look progressive, and she'll be more likely to give employment opportunities to others, which will push the company more progressively." There was a whirl of clicks as Ms. Fulton typed in the commands, and then pressed enter once again. Just one more round of changes for their candidate, and that would do. Her name was Karen, right? That sounded right. She was a little muddy on how she had gotten here and why she was naked, but she knew her name. That was a start, at least. Speaking of muddy, Karen felt tingles as she struggled to piece together what was going on. She looked down, and watched as the skin on her hand darkened. The stain spread quickly up her arm, and then to her torso where it ran rampant across her body. Of course, there's more to being black than just dark skin. Subtle changes in form and figure spread across Karen's body. Her hair frizzed up, moving to defy gravity. Her nose lost its point. Her hazel eyes became greener, just to buck a stereotype. Her body became a bit more pear-shaped, her bust giving up a little to her already perfect rear. Karen sat on the floor as the last of the physical changes ended, even as the spellware in her brain once again began smaller adjustments. Memory is wonderfully context-based, a couple central memories about one's parents altered in an incredibly minor way, a couple of counterfeit experiences added, and presto. She had always been this way. A precise combination of knocks came from the door, and Karen snapped up in a daze. If a brain is merely an organic computer, then Karen's was running on safe mode. With only a second thought for modesty causing her to cover her nipples with her hand, the woman opened the door and retrieved the folded clothes that had been left for her before retreating back to her sanctum. Panties, black, satin, slid up her legs first, feeling so good against her smooth legs. A matching bra came next. She chose gray suit pants over a skirt, and a sunshine yellow blouse which accentuated her dark skin in a way that made her look almost model-like. She sighed as she slipped on her flats, and then grabbed a pair of glasses, slipping the oval frames onto her face. Another knock at the door cut her out of her trance, and she looked around for a second, reassessing her surroundings. Something was different now, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. "I guess there's nothing for it now," she muttered, walking to the door and opening it. Miss Fulton was waiting for her there, a neutral expression on her face. "The board will see you now," she said in a terse manner. The pair re-entered the boardroom, where Karen was greeted with the smiling faces of old white men. It was mildly disquieting how pleased they looked, but it could only mean good things for her. The chairman shook her hand vigorously. "Ms. Gaines, you'll be pleased to know that after careful deliberation, we have decided that not only will the company be keeping your services post-merger, but you will be getting a substantial raise to reflect how much we value you as an asset to this company." "That's very kind, sir." Karen Gaines, newly minted Executive Technology Manager of Crossdressing Global, said as she moved around the room. Something still was strange, but she could put that aside for now. It was time to celebrate. Epilogue: 1 year later, there was a knock at the door as the chairman took his first sip of his tea, looking over the daily stock prices. The door swung open soundlessly, but for some reason he was struggling on concentrating who it was. He felt electricity in his gut that steadily spread down to his groin and then up his arms. His eyes widened as he looked at his cup. "Hello, Mr. Chairman." The chairman watched in horror as his hands became more delicate and feminine before his eyes. "How?" he blubbered. "Why?" Karen Gaines, flanked only by Ms. Fulton, locked the mahogany door to the office before considering the old man before her who was rapidly becoming a young woman. She wore a designer jacket over a Star Wars t-shirt and a skirt that was to die for. "One of my originals coded in a loophole in the spellware, a safety just in case you tried, well, what you did. After that, it was a simple matter for me to track down the recording of the original transformation, requisition the appropriate nanomagic mix from Randy, and have the lovely Miss Fulton here slip it in your imported tea." She gestured at Ms. Fulton. "She was one of your first forays with this technology, wasn't she? A researcher and your ex-wife, accidentally exposed to the prototype, gave you the perfect minion. A brilliant spellcaster, business mind, and secretary, all wrapped in a submissive package." As a quiet aside, she nodded her head. "I fixed that, by the by. We're buds now." At this point, the chairman was 68 going on 20. A balding head saw growth that it hadn't seen in decades, black and straight, as nanomachines stimulated growth. "Please, I can change you back, both of you back." His voice cracked as wrinkles faded from his face. Karen shook her head. "No, you couldn't. And why would you want to? I'm better than Kay Allen and Aaron Dorns ever were." For the first time, Miss Fulton spoke up, her voice as taciturn as ever but now with a note of levity. "Karen and I thought that we should take control of the company. It seemed fair, after all. That starts with you, and then we will deal with the rest of the board." She leaned in close, towering over the now slight boy as the changes started dramatically affecting his face. Eyes turned almond in shape and color. Some will be replaced, some will be replaced with themselves, and some may be consolidated. Karen chipped in. I drew out a chart. At this point, very little remained of the chairman of old. She was Indian and slight, with long black hair down her back. She lay on the floor, crying, as the last bit of the chairman's body was swept away by nanomachines. Anyways, Ms. Fulton will take the slot of chairman, while I am given the gig of president. We're gonna keep building on what you did for this company, we really are. At this point, Karen was gesturing excitedly. Her audience wasn't listening. Trudy was the name that kept appearing in the old chairman's head. As much as he fought it, he couldn't fight the inevitability of that name. It had been easier for the nanomachines to work from scratch. Business school was only given an update of setting, a refresher on the new tech, but pretty much everything else was isolated or deleted. Parents died a couple years back, car accident, very sad. No other family, moved to the big city, given a brand new opportunity. The new generation of nanomachines could alter clothing too, which is precisely what they proceeded to do as the mental changes took hold. Soon, a fresh-out-of-college intern sat where an executive had once stood. Things changed, time passed. She awoke in the office to the sound of the phone ringing. Crap, must have dozed. She grabbed the phone. Mrs. Fulton's office. No, she's off on her honeymoon with Mrs. Gaines, but I'm sure I could leave a message. Thank you. Trudy wiped the sweat from her brow. Even a year after the deal was done, corporate mergers still were stressful.